Hi gang, happy Sunday. I'm back with more shoutouts, and this week it's a real sort of hodgepodge, so buckle in. I've got my computer in front of me, and I'm just going to go through a few things that may not seem connected at first, but they're connected in my brain. But before I hop into the shoutouts proper, I first have to give a shout out to Rob over at the Doctor Who show. You may remember in my video on Friday, I mentioned that Rob and Dave's podcast, The Doctor Who show, had done some episodes about putting classic Doctors in New Who episodes, vice versa. It inspired my challenge. Well, I tagged them on Twitter, and they saw my tweet, and Rob sent me a really nice message and retweeted my video. So I just want to say thank you so much, Rob, Dave, for your wonderful podcast and for giving me the shout out. And I follow them on Twitter, and you guys should follow them too if you are Doctor Who fans like me. And I know that I maybe don't have as many super dedicated Doctor Who fans in my audience, but if you're interested, you can find their show at thedwshow.net, or you can follow them at the DW Show on Twitter. They're good guys. Okay, so diving into recommendations proper, I do actually have to pick up a thread that I started last Sunday. You may remember one of the TikTok creators I recommended last week is Jay Draper, who makes London history videos. She's also got a YouTube channel, and just this past week I was watching some of her videos. She did one fairly recently about the history of the Cockney musical, which helps to explain why the characters in Les Mis all have English accents. And about a year ago, she did a video describing the problems with the ending of My Fair Lady and dived into the Pygmalion and Galatea myth. So the very quick summary of the Pygmalion Galatea story is essentially that in Greek mythology, there was a sculptor named Pygmalion who created a sculpture that represented his ideal of womanhood, and he fell in love with his statue, and then the goddess Aphrodite brought her to life. In the earliest versions of the story, the statue isn't named, but she was later given the name Galatea. This story was the inspiration for George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion, which in turn was the inspiration for Lerner and Loewe's musical My Fair Lady. In both the play and the musical, our sculptor Pygmalion becomes instead phonetics professor Dr. Henry Higgins, who one day runs into a flower girl named Eliza and takes it upon himself to transform her into a lady of manners. Basically, he makes a bet with this guy that he could pass off a flower girl as a duchess just by teaching her to speak properly. So Eliza in the story, of course, represents our statue, Galatea. Now, the Pygmalion story has been adapted many times, but one of the things that people struggle with is the ending. So in the myth, in Ovid's Metamorphosis, Pygmalion does fall in love with and marry the statue he created that was brought to life by Aphrodite. In adapting the story for the stage, George Bernard Shaw was very much against any kind of romantic happy ending for Professor Henry Higgins and Eliza. And here's where I say, if you want to learn more about this, you should just go watch Jay Draper's video because it's incredible. But the gist of it is, in the play and in the musical, Henry Higgins is about 40 and Eliza is about 20, and Henry Higgins is sort of mean. Higgins is stuck up and snobbish and harsh to Eliza and orders her around all the time. He really does treat her like his creation and takes the credit for any accomplishments she makes. But My Fair Lady is a musical comedy, and musical comedies are supposed to end with our leads getting together. I like My Fair Lady. It's not one of my favorite musicals, but I enjoy it. The happy ending works for me. I think that it's fine, but it's maybe not the most satisfying ending for a modern audience. But that is, of course, just one way of tackling the Pygmalion myth, and the next two shoutouts on my list are about a work that takes a very different approach. One thing I don't talk a lot about on this channel is my interest in interactive fiction and electronic literature. For more on that, I've got a whole page of recommendations on my website you can check out. I will leave the link in the doobly-doo. But for today, I want to tell you a little bit about a newsletter I've been reading lately. Erin A. Reed is an award-winning author of interactive fiction and digital games who right now is writing a newsletter called 50 Years of Text Games. Here's the description of the series from his Substack. 50 Years of Text Games is a project that traces a path through the history of digital games without graphics by picking one game from each year between 1971 to 2021 and taking an in-depth look at how it works and why it's important. Now me, because I'm 25, I was born right in the middle, so most of the games from this first half I'm not familiar with. There's a couple names I recognize, like the Oregon Trail from 1971, where this whole thing begins, and a little bit later on there's of course the interactive fiction adaptation of Douglas Adams' work, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But it wasn't until about a month ago, when Aaron got to the year 2000, that he finally was talking about a game that not only did I recognize, but that I had played and loved. And that game, of course, is Emily Short's Galatea. When we talk about text games, we're generally talking about two different kinds of games. There's parser games, where you have to type in commands, and there's hypertext games, where you're clicking on links. I'm a big fan of hypertext games. I've even made a few using Twine, but I was never really that into parser games. I didn't grow up with them, I didn't really get them, and I felt like there was a whole language I was missing out on. Because parser games require you to type commands to interact with them, there's a whole language of interacting with parsers that I wasn't familiar with. Like, okay, N is the shortcut for north, S for south, and so on, and there are also similarly commands for the various senses. You might need to type look at or examine to get more information about something in your surroundings. Parser games are generally a lot more open-ended than hypertext games, and it was that open-endedness that made them a little bit confusing and frustrating to me. For example, if the game took place in a large space and you were navigating north, east, south in order to get from one location to another, you sort of had to remember that and keep a map in your head, because the game wouldn't present you with a menu of options but where to go next. But Galatea is very unlike a traditional parser game. It takes place basically in one room with one other character, and it doesn't involve any puzzles. The premise of the game is that you are a viewer in an art gallery approaching Pygmalion statue Galatea come to life. Her creator, Pygmalion, is nowhere to be found, and so Galatea has an opportunity to speak for herself. So in a traditional parser game, there might be lots of different verbs you can try in order to interact with the world in different ways, but in Galatea, the verbs are pretty much limited. It's ask Galatea about X or tell Galatea about X. There are a few other things you can do, like move a little or touch her, but mostly the point of the game is the conversation. So instead, it's the nouns that become important, the topics of conversation, and as soon as she starts talking, you can pick up on just about any little thing Galatea says and ask her more about it. You can ask her how did it feel to be carved. You can ask her her opinions on love. You can ask if she believes in God. In My Fair Lady, the story is essentially over once our ordinary flower girl, Eliza, has been transformed into a lady, when the statue really comes to life. But in Emily Short's Galatea, that's just the start of the story. Now that she has this new life, what is she going to do with it? How does she feel about her creator? How did she come to be in this gallery? You can read more about this game in Aaron Reed's newsletter, 50 Years of Text Games. Emily Short also has her own blog where she talks about interactive fiction and storytelling, and it's a brilliant resource. Anyway, those have been my slightly scatterbrained shoutouts for this Sunday. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you want to know more about any of the things that I've recommended, just let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I will see all of you tomorrow.